You asked and Imperial listened. Due to extreme popularity and brewer demand, the A44 Kveik blend is being released as a year-round available strain. This blend of 3 proprietary Kveik strains absolutely loves hot fermentations, producing beers bursting with fruity notes of pineapple, guava, and tropical flavors. Use it for your summer blonde ales, your hazy IPA, or anything else you want to have a delectable fruity fermentation character. And A44 is absolutely perfect for those who may not have the ability to precisely control fermentation temperatures. Just pitch your pouch and let her rip. Pick up your homebrew pouch wherever Imperial Yeast is sold and place commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. Brewing in general has typically been viewed as a fairly time-intensive process, one that requires multiple steps that occur over the course of, 5 or more hours, not to mention the time it takes to ferment and package. This gets amplified when it comes to brewing lager beers, which are rooted in centuries of tradition and rules one is told they absolutely must follow in order to produce a quality product. However, some of us have ignored these rules a bit and experimented with brewing lagers using some interesting methods. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this Brews Views episode to talk about our opinions on cutting corners when brewing lager styles is contributor Cade Jobe.
This is going to be a fun episode. I would say I'm generally in my personal life not a traditionalist, but I don't know, Marshall. Do you ever have those times where you sometimes you do things that you can't really explain why you do them, but you just sort of continue to do it, or people tell you you're supposed to do it, and you kind of just shut up about it and go, "Okay, fine, I'll do it."
Yeah, I absolutely can relate. That was like the first 5-6 years of my brewing.
Yeah, so that's kind of how I feel about cutting corners with brewing lagers. Is there I would like to say that I use fairly traditional methods, but sometimes I just don't have time. But at the same time, there are things that I still do very traditionally, despite evidence that I shouldn't be doing it that way. So this one's going to be interesting. And also, fair warning to everybody, I'm probably going to end up making both sides of this issue pretty mad because and I may even contradict myself a couple of times because I do want to spend some time talking about like why people traditionally brewed this way and maybe why I do it differently now or why you do it differently now. And then honestly, sometimes too, I want to just call some things out as what I think is crap. Even if I still do it that way, but yeah, I'm pretty excited about this one.
Yeah. Brews Views, this whole series is about being unabashedly honest in our opinions about a topic that, in the brewing world is kind of viewed as being somewhat, I guess, controversial. I have gotten more crap over the last few years for publicly sharing the non-traditional methods that I've used to make lagers. It's absolutely amazing to me how much some people seem to care about how others choose to brew. But alas, this thing is this kind of controversial topic. And I say this every time we do these episodes that I get a little bit anxious because I don't really enjoy conflict. I tend to kind of refrain from engaging people when they get angry about some brewing thing that I did that they don't agree with. But at the same time, I do think it's fun to kind of dig into these things. And I definitely look forward to chatting with you about this topic, Cade. Now, just a quick reminder for those who may be sensitive to certain language. Again, this is a show where we like to be a little bit more unhinged, a little bit less censored. So if we let some words slip, we do apologize. But keep in mind that we won't be censoring ourselves as much as usual. So, all right. If you enjoy the show and you'd like to make sure it sticks around, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/brewlosophy, where in return for making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Coming up in May is Noah Bissell of Bissell Brothers Brewing out of Portland, Maine. This was a highly requested guest for our Q&A sessions, and Noah was very, very kind in agreeing to do this one. So for all of you hazy IPA lovers out there, you don't want to miss it. Make your pledge by May 29th, 2020 to be included in this session. Past guests have included folks like John Palmer, Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo, and Grandmaster BJCP Judge Gordon Strong. And all of those past sessions are available on our private Facebook page for patrons to watch whenever they want to. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a little rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts. We would really appreciate it. Feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers gorgeous stainless gear such as the turnkey BH15 pilot brewing system, which has a hard-plumbed manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. A listener named Kevin, he didn't leave his last name, commented on our recent Short and Shoddy English Porter episode that came out a couple weeks ago. He said, since stout and porter are party guiled, they shared the same grist. The whole roasted barley difference is a modern invention and has no historical basis. Now, what he's referring to here is a comment that people made on my Short and Shoddy English Porter, because I used roasted barley only because I didn't have black patent, but people were saying that it can't be a English Porter if it doesn't have black patent. My understanding, and I may be wrong here, is that stout is associated with Ireland, where unmalted roasted barley is used to make stout, while porter is an English invention that relied on a black patent, or what's called black malt, which is malted. I completely trust that some brewers party guiled to make stout and porter using the same roasted grains. I'm just not sure if that started before English porter was a thing, or
well, I would say I don't think that stout was necessarily just an Irish style.
Right. We know that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was all that sort of, that area, what's now the UK, that did both stouts and porters. And I'd actually have to go back and look at my history books on that stuff, my beer history books. Yes, I have beer history books. I'd have to go back and look at that and see. But I'm not sure that, I know they overlapped a little bit, but I'm pretty sure they were sequential, that porters and stouts were sequentials. I can't remember which one came first, but they sort of like transitioned. So yeah, it makes sense that they overlap. In terms of using roasted barley, I'm not sure. I'd like to see that guy's, Kevin's source, because I do think that roasted barley can be used in a porter, the same way that black patent malt can be used. I mean, roasted barley versus black patent malt, there's differences in those ingredients. I would say that roasted barley is a little bit less acrid to me than black patent. I get a lot more of the acrid characters when I use black patent. Roasted barley is a little bit smoother, and to me, that's what you want in a porter versus a stout.
More chocolatey type of flavor, right?
Yeah, exactly. The more smooth chocolate type of flavor than a stout. Like with the stout, I kind of want some of that coffee, some of the really strong roasty characters, strong roasted characters. So, I mean, I don't know. I personally don't have any problems with somebody using roasted barley in a porter, and I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look at and research it, but I'm not sure that I would fault anyone for using roasted barley in a porter or say that it's out of style because you used roasted barley.
Right. Well, and I guess, Kevin's comment about the, stout and porter being party guiled, I guess what I question is whether that was how it originated. I'm almost certain that's not the case. I think English porter was kind of its own style before brewers started party guiling like that. And for those who don't understand party guiling, that just means basically using one mash to create multiple beers. I don't know. I'm no beer historian, but I appreciate the feedback, Kevin. Perhaps you're right. And it's something I'd be interested to learn more about. So if you have a source, please do let us know. But thanks for the feedback either way. If you have show feedback or something you'd like to share with us about the show, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a line on social media. A couple months ago, before all of this stupid COVID-19 bullshit, listener, patron, and good friend of Brewlosophy, Jonathan McPherson, sent me some stuff that he made, one of which was a raspberry hibiscus Berliner Weiss that he calls Berry Beautiful Sunrise, that he kettle soured with good belly shots and fermented with imperial yeast A44 Kviking.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. Oh, it's a.
Are you ready to take a sour? Look at it.
This is sour. It's a fruity sour.
It so is. I don't even have to drink it.
Don't drink it. We've never done this before. Let's do an entire review. Everything about we think the smell and the taste and everything, and at the end we'll take a sip and see if we validate.
It's
it's
amazing.
A sour.
I know this.
I can smell it. God,
I can tell by looking at it.
Dude, I feel bad for normal people.
I know. I don't know how they cope.
Oh, that's a sour.
Oh, that's good.
You weren't supposed to.
I couldn't wait.
Is that why you have a daughter?
It's delicious.
Oh, God. The one way that we've both grown up together is sours. Is sours. I remember when Marshall first told me that there's a thing called sour beer. I'm like, sour beer? That's like sour milk. Who would
Yeah,
who would drink this swill? And I love it.
I drank it. He brought something out of the shower that's been
Yeah,
sitting
it's
there
like
for...
I'm back into the shower beer.
Yeah, it's very good.
Oh, this is delicious, dude. But it's a light sour. Usually that's a it's a Berliner Weiss. Berliner Weiss. Usually a light sour, what we would call a light sour is usually a Berliner Weiss. So let's call this now let's find the fruit flavor.
A little cherry-ish.
Cherry Berliner Weiss. You good with that?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Let's put stock in that. But first of all, this is a incredibly delicious.
We went out to a local beer place, pizza place that had sours.
Yes, we did.
This is better than any. I had 4 or 5 different
Oh
ones.
my God, dude.
This
I
is
gave
better.
it 3 million jerseys. How many Tims?
At least 2.9. So for a total of 20.
No, you didn't carry the one. You never carry the one. 34. This is a incredibly delicious. I love this.
Very good.
I don't think the guys have ever been so spot on with a review. They nailed that it was a Berliner Weiss or a Hafafafai. No cherry in the beer, but in my experience, and I think you've had experience with hibiscus as well, Cade, it does sort of give off a sort of cherry kind of tart character that's really pleasant, and blended with the raspberry. I mean, I drank this beer with the guys, and it could easily have passed for a cherry Berliner Weiss.
Oh, totally. And I wish I could have been there to see your proud dad face when they nailed the Berliner Weiss style, because I can only imagine what that looked like. But I mean, man, that beer sounds so good. I mean, we've been talking about it at Blue Owl. We do a beer called Tropical Brute that we're thinking about putting some hibiscus in this summer, and we even have a raspberry sour that's a Belgian style ale that we brew here. I love those flavors, that raspberry and the hibiscus, and them describing that as cherry. That to me, I've never had them together, but I could totally see how that makes sense. And for them to get that, nail the Berliner Weiss style, nail that it's a sour, and have a cherry when raspberry and hibiscus is used. Holy crap! These guys are going to have better tasting ability than I have here pretty soon. So
I'll tell you, what's funny is Tim particularly, when he and I are just sharing beers off of my tap, or if we go to Pendragon or something like that, he starts trying to come up with what am I tasting here, and so it's fun to watch. Speaking of Pendragon, they have I believe it's a sour or a tart saison that they hit with hibiscus as well, and it's probably one of my favorite beers that they make. And I'm not a big fan of beers with adulterants in it, and this beer is just so incredibly refreshing, and so shout out to them for using hibiscus as well. Jonathan, though, boy, is he a good brewer. I've had a couple of other beers that he's made. The guys reviewed more of them. You'll hear those in the future. The dude is nailing it. And if you've ever seen Jonathan's brewing setup, he posts a lot on like Facebook groups and such. My God, it's like a miniature, like a mini professional, brewing system in his basement or whatever. So
yeah, I'm super jealous of Jonathan's system.
Yeah.
But also, Jonathan, if you are listening, please send me some of your beers too. I'd be happy to share some Blue Owl with you if you want.
Oh, setting up trades here on the show. That's
yeah,
good.
there you go.
I know that he's sent beers to the dudes at Chop and Brew as well, and they've had some positive stuff to say. But man, thanks again, Jonathan, for sending that in. If you'd like to have a beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and I'll get you all set up. When we get back from this short break, our unabashed thoughts on cutting corners when brewing lagers. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clearer wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exchillerator.com today. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. One of the more common things I've heard from brewers who enjoy lager styles but are hesitant to try making one themselves is that it requires too much work and time, and in some cases, equipment. I can definitely relate with this sentiment. I mean, it took me nearly 10 years to brew my first lager after I started homebrewing, and I only gave it a shot after acquiring certain things that I was told were required to avoid screwing things up. We're talking about a fermentation chamber and a big flask and such. Cade, I know that I've been brewing a bit longer than you. Can you relate with this, though?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I started brewing ales, and the reason why I started brewing ales, even though I much prefer lagers and even prefer drinking lagers then, is because I was told you have to have a cold temperature, you've got to store it for a long time, you have to do all these things, you have to have this equipment, that equipment, you've got to do and follow these methods, and if you can't, then you're not going to make a good quality lager. So yeah, I was right there too, and then I started brewing lagers, and I started following traditional methods. Once I got everything sort of set up in a way that I thought was at least my version of a traditional lager method. I'm still probably not doing everything the traditional way, but giving it the time, fermenting cool, all those sorts of things that you talk about, diacetyl rest, even trying not to add any, follow Reinheitsgebot, all that sort of stuff, and then over the years, just start reading different things, reading research, and I still do some things the same way, but I generally have made a lot of changes. I would say I have more of a hybrid approach now, but
and that's the thing. I'll never forget the first time I decided to jump into lager brewing. I had a 14 cubic foot chest freezer that I was using as a fermentation chamber, and I happened to have just kegged I always was brewing 2 beers at a time. This was prior to brewlosophy being a thing. And so my chamber was empty, and I thought, you know what? At the time I only had, I think I had 3 or 4 taps. I thought, I've got my taps are full right now. I've got a full keezer. We're all good. I might as well, if I'm going to, I've got all this time. So I'm gonna brew a lager. I'm gonna brew it right. No one at the time that I was aware of was doing the crazy crap that we talk about with the short and shoddy approach and such.
Yeah, totally.
So nobody was. Everywhere you looked, it was just you got to do this, you got to do that, and it's just beer. I say that often, but still, I was kind of anxious approaching this thing, and hearing one of the most common things you hear when it comes to lagers is, "Oh, there's nothing to hide behind,"
Oh yeah, I hear that
it's
all the time.
It's so clean, it's so simple. The beer honestly came out fantastic. I think it took me 8 weeks grain to glass, which I can't even imagine doing that again these days after what I've gone through. But it was good. But it certainly opened up. It started making me wonder. There's got to be some shortcuts that can be taken. And I think that's a good place for us to start, because I think that speaks a bit to my personality, for better or for worse. I have some interesting philosophies when it comes to living in general, and that obviously is going to kind of be an analog to the way that I view brewing methods and whatnot. I think first off, I kind of a motto that I live by is if I want to try something new and it's not going to hurt anybody, then there's no reason not to. And I feel like a lot of people just can't really relate with that very much.
Yeah. I mean, I totally understand you and I hear you. I would say that my brewing style is probably a little bit different. It's that old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
I would say that's probably more of my brewing style and philosophy, but my brewing philosophy has changed over the years. So I would say when I first started brewing, the first book I ever read whenever I was learning to brew was Palmer's How to Brew. I think a lot of people start there. It's a very common brewing text, and it's a great text, by the way. If you're looking, and if you're a new brewer looking for good information, so I can't remember what is it at Kansas City pale lager, or it's some city, and it's a pale ale, and that's like the first beer that he has, and he goes step by step through each of the beers. And I remember going step by step through those, and then for every single beer I did after that, I would follow exactly those steps in exactly that way, and I didn't really question it or anything. I just sort of said, hey, this is what made a good beer. It ain't broke, so I'm not gonna fix anything. I don't need to change it.
I think that that is a very solid way to approach brewing and honestly to approach living. I think that a lot of homebrewers out there who are listening to this can relate very much with that sentiment, with that mentality. It's never been, I've been the guy who's like, it's not broke. I wonder what else we can do without breaking it. And that was just as a kid, my mom used to tell me that she'd find me taking little things apart just to see what I can do, put them back together. And I guess there's this itch that I've got, that I'm curious if things have to be done. So one person told me that I optimistically question authority, and not that I'm like a punk, and I'm going against authority, because it's not like I get in trouble or anything, but if it's not going to hurt anybody, I don't see the harm in trying new things. And I've been told in brewing that when I talk publicly about not following the traditional lager brewing methods, that it's disrespectful to those who developed these methods. And I feel like that's such a weak argument, I guess, because I have no intention to disrespect anyone. In fact, I'm a big believer in the whole, we stand on the shoulders of giants. I would like to think that if I was sitting here with some of and I'm not going to name names because a lot of people have associated their approaches with specific names, that they would enjoy the fact that we've taken what they developed because of the resources they had available to them, back then. And they'd be excited about some of the stuff that we're trying out and we're doing,
Yeah, I mean, like a great example is, think about, like, for example, if you were doing a porter versus like a lagered, I don't know, like a Schwarzbier or something as well, or a stout and a Schwarzbier. Those beers are different, and there's reasons why. Like, think about like the brewing ingredients back then. So back then, it was going to have some sort of Brett character to it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you're fermenting in barrels, and you're fermenting sometimes even with open fermentation, and things are potentially getting in there, spoilage bacteria and that kind of stuff. And then you've got this lager that has sat in a cave for, months and is theoretically lost all that character or anything that was in it. It was closed. It wasn't exposed to elements or heat or any of these other things that could potentially spoil your beer. Mm-hmm. And so I would imagine that at that time you would look at this and go, oh man, I like that beer better because it doesn't have these other flavors that I don't like. So if that's how I get these flavors, then that's how I'm going to brew beer. And people just continue to do it because that's what they like.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I could see too, it was also, for me, my brewing philosophy also started to change whenever I started screwing things up, right? like I'd mess up I'll never forget. It's still in my notes. I don't know if I've told this story before or not, but I think it was my third batch of beer, and I was still chilling my pot. I was cooking on the stovetop, and I was chilling my pot in my sink with ice in it and water, right? And so it was actually a kitchen sink, and my pot was just sitting in there, and I had it in the ice bath, and I was reaching across the sink, and I turned my water on accidentally with my arm, and turned water on directly into the beer, right? Like straight out of my tap
into your cooling wort. Yeah.
into my cooling wort. And then like I flipped out and freaked out. So I grabbed the pot and like picked it up really fast. And then I splashed whenever I did that. So I sat it back down. And when I sat it back down in the ice, a piece of ice like fell into the pot. And so I was like, oh my God, I remember writing in my brewing notes that I've probably just destroyed this beer.
Yep.
You know, I added water to it. And a piece of ice that was sitting in my sink fell in my beer. I'm screwed.
Yep.
Like, this beer is going to taste like crap. But guess what? It didn't.
It was fine. Yeah.
Yeah, it was totally fine. You know, I think that's where I started to sort of question how important each of these little things are. And it's still, you mentioned this too, and I wanted to bring this up. It still shocks me how much people cling to the ways that they believe things should be brewed, and like won't listen to evidence or contrary evidence. But it's still really surprising to me.
Well, so the thing that gets me, there's kind of two parts to that really get me. And the first one is, I agree that in general, and this goes regardless of what brewing approach you think is best. Some people are genuinely married to their opinion being superior when it comes to brewing, as well as other areas, I'm sure. But some people are so married to it that any questioning of it is perceived as like a threat, right? And so they react. And I get that. You know, the psychologist in me sees that. I understand it. It doesn't bother me. It makes sense, I should say. The part that gets me is, when was the last time? And this is an honest question, Cade, and if any listener out there has a good response for this and can shoot me a link, please do. When was the last time you saw somebody online or at a homebrew club meeting or something like that who brews using less than traditional methods call out the person brewing lagers traditionally? You very rare. I've never seen it. I've never seen somebody say, "Oh man, that's stupid. You don't have to do this. You shouldn't boil for 90 minutes or do a decoction mash or whatever." Rather, it's almost always the opposite. You usually see these traditionalists, these guys who are really into brewing lagers, the traditional German way is often what we hear, trying to convince people who are doing it a different way that they shouldn't be doing that. And that's the mentality that I really struggle to grasp, because I couldn't give two shits how you brew. I don't care what kind of beer you make. It doesn't bother me if somebody reads one of our short and shoddy articles and decides to replicate it and they enjoy it. They enjoy the beer that they. That's great. You know. But there's people out there who genuinely care that people aren't doing it the way they're doing it, and that's what I struggle to understand.
Yeah, it's that my way is better than your way,
right?
Kind of thing, right? Like, and that's what that really bothers me. And you've heard me enough times on the podcast, talk about how if you're brewing things the way that you like it and your beer tastes great, then you just keep doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think everybody on Brewlosophy generally has that mentality.
Well, it's sort of what drives or motivates us, is that almost like subconsciously, because of the fact that we embrace that idea that we don't care. We're not trying to convince people to change the way they brew, though there's a segment of people out there who are convinced that we're out here to ruin home brewing. We talked about this in another episode. It just blows my mind that anybody would even think that we care enough to do that, Yeah,
Marshall. I mean, how can you use pale malt instead of pills whenever you're making a lager, or a German pill, or how can you do are you kidding me? You're going to do a 30-minute mash with a Pilsner malt or a 30-minute boil? You're going to get DMS, aren't you, Marshall?
Yeah, exactly. Well, when I think about, the kind of the hard opinions that some people hold about brewing in general, but particularly when it comes to lagers, I can't not consider some of the biases that are involved. Now I have another little theory when it comes to bias, and that's that the more ardent somebody is that they are unbiased, the more biased they likely are. When I hear somebody claim that they approached an evaluation or whatever it is from a non-biased perspective, that I'm presuming that they were probably more biased than people who owned that they were probably biased, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. The two biggest things that I think of when it comes to this, first off, is expectation bias. So if I serve you let's say a Pilsner that I brewed, and I tell you that I did all of these non-traditional brewing methods, or that I just didn't follow convention, you are more likely, if you hold on to the belief that tradition and conventional approaches are the best approach, you are automatically going to have a negative, or that preconceived belief is going to influence your perception of the beer. That you can't escape that. Now, some people are better at suspending that bias and owning it and saying, yeah, maybe it is, but you know what? I'm going to do my best to see what I really think about this beer. But you still can't separate yourself from that expectation bias.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. And this may be, this may be a little bit where I contradict myself, right? I warned everybody that I was going to contradict myself.
It's okay, man.
The people that have that expectation bias, or the people that believe those things, that believe that because they're following traditional methods that their lagers are really good, a lot of those people are actually making really damn good lagers, and consistently really good lagers.
Absolutely.
I mean, I know there's a couple of guys here in the Zealots that are phenomenal lager brewers that follow the traditional methods, and they'll swear up and down that you just cannot get the same lager character if you don't let it condition, or if you ferment at warm temperatures. And I can't argue that they're wrong. No. Because their beers are really good.
But also, I don't think somebody like you, and I'm not trying to pat my back here, but somebody like me as well would argue that anyways, because I just don't care. If they're making good beer, that's all that matters. The fact that they like it and that I like it is even a bonus, that I get to drink this person's great beer. How they made it I guess that just doesn't get to me. It's cool to listen to. I like to shoot the shit about it. Like, oh, cool. Let's talk about the way we approached making these. I thinking of a little anecdote here. When I first started messing around with fermenting lagers warm, in fact, I made this Helles that was fermented with, oh boy, this is going to get me in trouble, a Kolsch yeast. So I made this thing, and I at the very beginning, I told people, I was excited, like, hey, I made this Helles. It tastes like other Helleses that I've had, but it was fermented with a Kolsch yeast. And you can imagine what the response was. Well, this obviously isn't a Helles. It doesn't taste right. It's too fruity, yada, yada, yada. So I just stopped telling people. And lo and behold, it was a Helles again to these people's minds. They started perceiving, because the expectation was there that, and there were times, of course, being the jerk that I am, where I'd kind of fib a little and tell people that, this is a traditionally fermented Helles, whatever. But boy, I'll never forget when I shared that Helles recipe on the website, the comments from people who hold stronger opinions about how lagers absolutely need to be made, talking about how, in essence, that I'm misrepresenting what a Helles should be because I fermented one with a Kolsch yeast and thought it tasted good.
Yeah. So you're making a lager with an ale yeast, or with a yeast that's not a lager yeast. So therefore, Marshall, you are not making a lager, right? Is that
that is you know what? We that is a topic that we can spend a lot of time talking about. Before we do that, I feel like what we should do is maybe go over some of the more traditional lager brewing methods, and to the extent that we know why people originally did these methods or employed these methods, and then why people do it today, and some of the arguments that we hear about it today, because it was my learning about traditional lager brewing methods and I guess the reasons behind some of the things people did that really caused me to question their necessity in this day and age, given certain modifications that have been made, or I guess upgrades. We've got better malt,
Sure.
more modified malt. We've got really, really hardy yeast nowadays, stuff like that. And before we get into this, to kind of focus on the one last logical fallacy. I've talked about it before, but the fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc, or what that translates to is after this, therefore because of this. When I think of lager brewing, that is the thing that I think of, because you've got so many people who look back and say, well, you got these German brewers who are putting these beers in caves and doing all of these things. We have to do it now because that's what made the beer good back then. That seems a little bit off to me, because what we're doing is we're failing to consider where we're at today and the resources that we have available to us now that they didn't have back then.
Yeah, and this is one of my favorite things about Brewlosophy, right? This is one of the things that I love that we do. It's that, okay, well, let's say that we are supposed to lager something for 3 to 4 weeks at cool temperatures, and if you don't do that, then you won't have the crisp lager character, right? Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's put it to the test and let's see what actually happens. So right. that's what I really love about Brewlosophy. Now, what that also means is that we can't say that doing it that way at, letting it lager for 3 to 4 weeks or, at cold temperatures is wrong, or you shouldn't do it.
Right.
And we never do, right? Like nobody at Brewlosophy is ever saying, yeah, that's just wrong. You should never do things that way. I don't think I've ever heard any of us say something like that.
Or even worse, you're stupid or dumb or bad for doing it that way. That's
right.
That's the kind of shit we get slung at us every once in a while.
Yeah, exactly. But if I can do something different and not have to let my beer sit in a cave for 3 months, I don't, obviously I don't have any caves around, but let it sit in my fermentation chamber for 3 to 4 weeks at cold temperatures. If I can just go ahead and put it on my tap and start drinking it, sometimes that's actually really nice. Now, some anecdotes that I have about some of this stuff. So we talked about it on the Kolsch episode that I used to let my Kolsch sit for 30 days.
Right.
And I still think, now this is just my personal opinion, and I really don't have any reason or any objective proof. Actually, I have evidence against it, but I still think that lager beers taste best in that 3 to 4 week after fermentation range.
Right.
So like letting it sit for a month and it's that like 30 to 60 or 30 to 75 days to me that's when it's prime. Like that's when that beer tastes really good. That's just me.
And I'm not going to judge you for liking old beer, dude. I mean, right. But that's the thing is, and I say that jokingly because that's great. If that's what you like, then go do it. If I like fresh flavors, then I'm going to drink my beer fresh. And I feel like it's more of again, to get back to that personality, kind of the way we approach life in general. We're never going to talk about politics on this show because I think that'd be stupid. But it's sort of the way I feel about the whole political thing as well. It's like you can hold these political beliefs, and I'm going to completely love you the same way I would anybody else because I chose mine, you chose yours, and that's perfectly fine by me. And it's the same way that I view brewing. So let's start off talking about I kind of go in order here of brewing process for lagers. When it comes to mashing, it's very, very common in lager brewing circles to perform a decoction mash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, decoction mashes, especially for a bock, right? I mean, if you're going to brew a bock, I always hear, you have to do a decoction style mash or a Czech Pils. The Czech Pils was originally the decoction mash, and you won't get that same character unless you do a decoction mash. I have personally never tried a decoction mash, and I have no plans ever to try a decoction mash because it just sounds miserable to have to do. But I know you have, Marshall.
No, I actually have not ever done a decoction mash for the same reasons that you have. But added to that is the experiment that Malcolm performed, showing that a triple decoction didn't produce any difference from a single infusion, mash. But what's interesting to me is the argument that I've heard, one of the few arguments at least that I've heard about a decoction mash and why people do it today. Like you said, it's popular for bock, it's popular for Czech Pils, is because it encourages the development of melanoidins. And that's that kind of toasty thing that you get in some of these beers. That's great. Maybe it does. There's a lot of arguments against that because melanoidin development requires really high temperatures. But maybe it does. Let's, for sake of argument, pretend that it actually does that. The interesting thing is I'm not sure that's, from what I've researched, that wasn't why brewers hundreds of years ago, back before there was the internet and other modern developments, they were doing it because they were using really under-modified malt, and that was their way of increasing extract, that per my understanding at least.
Yeah. I mean, that's totally my understanding as well. It also too, I think this is less often mentioned, but it also makes sense too. In terms of like keeping things at a temperature that you would want it at. Like you need to get you've got under modified malt, so you want to get and make sure you're getting the main conversion out of it. So you can take a little bit out of it, boil it, and then return it back so that you're maintaining a constant temperature. That
Exactly.
way you're not having to adjust the number of logs under the fire.
Yeah.
Or things like that. So, I mean, I think there were a lot of things that we did out of convenience hundreds of years ago that we don't have to do anymore. I mean, like a decoction mash to me is a great example of it. We don't necessarily, we can get that melanoidin character in other ways using other malts. We have much more flavor and specialty malts that can actually provide that, have the decoction done for us essentially.
Yeah. Like melanoidin malt or, there's all these different malts that you can swap in. at the same time, to go back on the decoction creating melanoidins and leading to some sort of a flavor impact, I think it's a valid question whether or not it actually does that, just given some of the research out there. I have heard also, though, that if you use under modified malt, the decoction has a bigger flavor impact on the beer. Not anything I've tested out, but hey, if that's what you want to do, by all means, I think it's great. Another interesting thing is and I feel like this isn't talked about nearly as much as it used to be just 5 years ago. But when you boil a lager wort, you're usually using Pilsner malt as some portion of that. And we all know that Pilsner malt has more SMM, the DMS precursor. So you got to boil it for a minimum of 90 minutes as opposed to the standard 60 minutes.
Yep, totally. I've heard that one before. And actually, one of the early texts that I read, I think it was Jamil, actually. I think if I'm wrong, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure Jamil Zainasef was one of the ones that suggested that you need to do a 90-minute boil for everything, not just Pilsner malt. 90-minute boil, 90-minute boil. And yes, I mean, we can say from a scientific perspective, Pils malt generally does have more of the DMS precursor SMM. So yeah, you can be safe and make sure that you don't get any DMS by having a vigorous boil for 90 minutes, right? But to me, this is always a question of insurance, and a question of how much you want to get, in terms of extract after that and efficiency and stuff. Because a 90-minute boil is also going to boil off a lot of your wort or a lot of your water. You're going to condense it a lot more. You have a lot of potential for scorching and browning character and color change and all those other things. To me, this is one of the ones that I used to do 90-minute boils, and I don't do 90-minute boils anymore because I've done 20-minute boils and not gotten DMS in my beers. On
a perceptible level, I've done as little as 20-minute boils with almost, I think it was 100% Pilsner malt, and got no perceptible DMS. Obviously, somebody could question my palate, which they have the right to do, and I think they should. So I've also done a 30-minute boil and a 90-minute boil on worts that were made from the same proportion of Pilsner malt. I think it was like 90%. There's an experiment out there if you're interested in reading about it. And I sent those beers off, the 90-minute boil and the 30-minute boil version. I sent those off to a lab for DMS testing, and neither had detectable levels of dimethyl sulfide. So there's, again, I'm an evidence guy. We're going to talk a lot more about how meaningful that is to me. But that says to me that I maybe this belief that we have that you have to do what authority has been telling us to do and boil, Pilsner malt worts for 90 minutes just maybe isn't. If you want to do it, is there any harm in doing it? Absolutely not. Do you feel more comfortable doing it? Then by all means, go and do it. But just because somebody chooses not to doesn't mean they're going to ruin their beer, in my opinion, at this point. And that's just, again, I feel like the decoction mash and the boil length thing are two of the more, I guess, kind of triggery, but, methods, because people really do hang themselves up on that. You missed the big one. If you're not going to do a decoction mash and you're not going to do a 90-minute boil, then surely you're at least going to ferment at lager temperatures, Marshall. Oh yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, that is one that it's called a lager, and we have also turned that into an adjective as well, right? You're lagering, I feel like that's one that just goes unquestioned by nature of the fact that you're making a lager beer. You're supposed to pitch cool. You're supposed to pitch a big amount of yeast because you're pitching into that cool wort, so it's going to need more oomph before it gets going. You keep it at, you pitch at 46 to 48 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 8 or 9 C. You ferment it at 48 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 9 to 10 C. I think a lot of the traditionalists don't even ramp up the temp for a diacetyl rest, maybe, but 4 or 5 degrees at the tail end of fermentation. But that is just, you don't go outside of that if you're making a lager beer.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I can't tell how many times, because this is one that I have switched. Obviously, I do quick lager methods now. I don't, mostly because, like you, Marshall, I usually have 1 or 2 beers going in the fermentation chamber at a time. Mm-hmm. If I have 2 lagers, and that's fine, but more often than not, it's a lager and an ale. And so I'm not gonna ferment my, here's my own bias coming out. I'm not gonna ferment an ale at lager temperatures, Marshall. An ale yeast at lager temperatures. But anyway, I don't normally necessarily follow this one anymore. And that one to me is the one that, I think I'm not going to say conclusively, because obviously we haven't conclusively shown, but we've done so many repeat experiments, where we've done a quick lager method, and just have never seen a difference in that one.
And to be fair, there are certain yeast strains that we've messed around with. One of them that comes to mind is the Grupo Modelo strain. Imperial Yeast calls it Que Bueno. I think some other labs call it Mexican lager or something like that. But it's the Grupo Modelo strain. We've shown that one does seem to, fermentation temperature does seem to have an impact. So, ferment it cool and you get one character, ferment it warm, you get another one. What's interesting is people still like the warm fermented one and perceive that beer as tasting like a lager. It just tastes a little bit different. This is one where that post hoc ergo propter hoc kind of comes into play the most for me. It makes sense to me. Back in the day, they didn't know much about microbiology, but they're kind of figuring stuff out as these Germans are making these delicious crisp beers, and they kind of figure out, wow, if we do this, ferment with this, bottom fermenting yeast, put it in a cave, let it sit there in the cool for a while. For one, this one yeast seems to work, so we may as well keep using it because it's doing what we like. And then we keep it in this cool area, and in the end, the beer comes out wonderful, right? That's great. Just because that's the way it worked back then, I said it earlier, but why does it have to stay that way? There's not many things that we do today that are exactly the same as they were done hundreds and hundreds of years ago, because that would be stupid, all right? We're more developed. We have a better understanding of the way things work, but for some reason in lager brewing, that people don't want to break away from that. People don't want to modernize it, it feels like.
Yeah, and that's where I sort of I'm less of a traditionalist and more of like a modernist. If I don't have to do things, if things save me time and they're not contributing a huge difference, then why not? Why not do it? I'm not so married to a method that I'm going to do it this way every time.
Right.
If there's evidence, or if there's my own personal experience, or if I've tried it and it didn't come out any different, why would I continue to do things that are harder on me? Now, there is merit to that. Some people like to do those things because they enjoy it.
Absolutely.
They enjoy the sexy factor of making a traditional German style lager beer. And there's something cool to that. I can understand that sentiment. It's not exactly me. That said, I still do things. I do some things traditionally.
Sure.
And I like to do those things traditionally. Like I said, I like to drink beers that have lagered for 3 to 4 weeks. But that doesn't make anybody wrong.
No. Well, and that's the thing is when people are doing things different, or they're stepping outside of the bounds of what people view as the right way. There are some people who view that as in a really negative light. And I may not understand that, and that's fine with me. Another really big thing when it comes to making lagers is, lagering them. And when, I think it was Greg Noonan who made the recommendation that when, for the lagering phase, you should go 7 to 12 days per every 2 degrees Plato, which, as an example, that would be like, let's say you made a 1048 OG Pilsner, you're looking at 6 to 10 weeks of just lagering time. So on top of the brewing and the fermentation and such, you're waiting another 2 months in essence before you drink that beer. And that's when it's in its prime, according to this. I rely instead on powdered time. I like to use gelatin. I know other people like Biofine. And I like the flavor of the beers that I make that are fined like that, fresh, where I'm getting more of those fresh hop characters, even though it might be subtle. I'm not using a ton of hops in these beers, but I prefer that over a beer that's been sitting around for 2 months. It's a personal preference thing. But there are folks who will tell you that's just not the way you do it.
Yeah. Like I said, I honestly don't use finings all that much anymore. One is I don't use gelatin because my wife is vegetarian, so it's too hard for me to keep like a sign on one of the beers that says, "Hey, this has gelatin in it. Don't drink this one." I've tried Biofine. I don't really notice. I've noticed results, but to me, I just don't really care.
Yeah.
My beers are generally clear and crisp enough that I really just don't care. And I probably, this is unique to me, I probably drink a little bit slower, right? I have 3 taps, but the people drinking my taps is just me and my wife. So if I was going through, 15 gallons of beer every month, then I would probably have a problem. To me, I drink a little bit slower on those things. I drink them a little bit and I like to sample each of the 3 beers, so I kind of ease through each of them equally. So a beer will sit on tap at my house for 6 weeks to 8 weeks, something like that.
Yeah,
that's not a long time for it to sit. It just sort of takes me that long to get through each of those beers. And to me, that's kind of when I find that's my sweet spot for drinking those beers. So maybe it has nothing to do with the actual taste of the beer. Maybe it's just the way I drink. But those are things that, based on my own personal experience, I continue to do, and I like the way that the beers taste.
Yeah,
at least my perception of my bias. So.
Well, to finish this piece off, I know there are other kind of traditional approaches, like only fermenting the clearest wort and stuff, leaving all the trub behind, spunding and whatnot. Again, those are methods that we've a lot of us more, I guess, brewers of today don't view as being necessary, but others have a preference for them, and that's great. For me, a lager beer in particular is ready to drink when it's clear. That's how I view it. There are those that will argue that other stuff continues to happen as you let it age. We know that oxidation is one of them. If you're using methods to reduce or eliminate cold side oxidation, there are other things that are going to happen. We understand that. I'm just not, in my experience, it hasn't been whatever it is that's happening isn't massively contributing positively to my experience drinking that beer. And again, I'm going to do what works for me in the way that I hope others do what works for them. So, well, we've got to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to share more of our thoughts and opinions on cutting corners when it comes to brewing lager beers. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you, and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather Glycol Chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to Grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or Glycol Chiller at Grainfather.com. Once again, that's Grainfather.com.
After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. For better or for worse, I do tend to be one of those guys who just sort of, prefers at least some evidence before adopting an idea. As disrespectful as this may come off to some, I certainly don't mean for it to. This isn't limited by who the idea came from. I still just want some solid proof. It's just in my bones. And I don't know how to get away from that. It's very difficult for me. And I've been called out for being, I question things too much. But if somebody comes to me with some claim, like as a good example would be that, I guess like oils can heal coronavirus or whatever. You know what? I'll take it with as some idea that you got. Show me some evidence, and then I'll start to tap away at it and potentially maybe even believe it. But until then, I just don't buy stuff. And it's the same when it comes to brewing lager beers. I have this weird thing where, and I kind of mentioned this before, where the harder somebody tries to convince me of their righteousness without evidence, or how right they are, how good that their methods are, the less likely I am to adopt those ideas, because it seems to me that there's something else driving that. The fact of the matter is that Brewlosophy, for the last 6 years, a little over 6 years now, we've done sensory analysis experiments. It's sort of what we're known for, many of which have suggested that certain methods purported to be required to make good lager beer may not necessarily be so. We don't scream this from the rooftops. We're not trying to proselytize a certain approach. We have fun with brewing, and we certainly like when hearing back from others who may have benefited per their words from something that we've done. But most of the time we're doing kind of the opposite of that. We're telling people, hey, this is just one data point, but check out these results. It's kind of interesting, pretty cool stuff. My perspective is leave it to the individual to choose how they brew. We don't need to like knock people over the head and tell them exactly, how they need to be doing things.
Yeah, sure. I mean, having evidence of these things is really, really important, right? And sort of a counter, not necessarily a counterpoint. I don't think you were necessarily making the argument that there's no evidence to support some of the lager methods, but there is some evidence out there that supports these things. Like, for example, we talked about with Pils malt. We know that Pils has a higher concentration of SMM generally than other malts do, because it can, I guess I should say, it can have a lower concentration than pale or some other malts. It depends on the malt, and it varies by malt and grain and lot and all those kinds of things. So there could be some evidence, scientific evidence, even, something that's been through scientific process, peer-reviewed research that says that, you need to have a 90-minute boil on Pilsner malt or malt that has SMM levels of this specificity in order that you don't get DMS, So, I mean, to me, there is evidence out there, but what matters also is sort of the quality of your evidence is what I would say too. And I think that's the point you're also making.
Yes.
Anecdotes are great. Like I said, my anecdote about, I said this a bunch of times now, but drinking my beer, I prefer the beers at 3 or 4 or 6 weeks after they've been done with fermentation. That's totally me. Like, that's not based on any sort of scientific research. And I'm not going out there telling anybody you can't drink your beer until it has until it sits for 3 or 4 weeks.
Right.
The quality of the evidence matters, right? And that's what sort of bothers me about whenever people get so up in arms about traditional lager methods. Oh man, I wish I could remember that Simpsons quote. Oh no, it really grinds my gears. That's it. The Family Guy. It really grinds my gears. That people will just say, you have to do it this way. And then you say, okay, well, what evidence do you have? And they say, well, this is how it's been done. And that just really grinds my gears. Okay, I get that's how it's been done. Yeah. And maybe if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But come on, show me something else.
Dude, so my thing is this. Go on and say the way that you do things. Claim that it's the best way. That's perfectly fine. Claim that it's what for you makes the best beer. Even go to the extent of saying that it is objectively better than any other method. I don't even care about that. The moment you start trying to convince somebody that unless they do it that way, they're doing it wrong, is when that's where I demand evidence. And what grinds my gears isn't so much the claim that they're making or their own, kissing the ass of history or whoever it is that they worship in the brewing world. What gets me is when they start trying to convince me to do what they're doing and calling me and other people out for not doing it their way. And then when you say, well, I'm open open to changing my mind. I would love to try this out. Show me some evidence. And their response is, well, how about just try it for yourself and you'll see. That's not evidence. You can't use anecdote to prove a theory. That's not how it works. Yeah. And what I don't understand, and this is the thing, is people can call us out all they want. I'm perfectly fine with that. We are not doing this crazy lab science. We've never claimed to be doing that. We are doing interesting sensory analysis. That's all we're doing. If I brew a beer and I boil it for 30 minutes and it's got 100% Pilsner malt, and that beer has, let's say, 10 parts per billion more DMS than one that's boiled for 90 minutes. Okay, yeah, you can make the claim that boiling for less time results in somewhat higher DMS. Can you perceive that? No. A 10 part per billion difference is likely not going to be perceptible. And so then that's where I come along and I'm like, well, then I don't see the necessity in doing that, right? But I feel like a lot of the claims that are made out there are so empty. It's either based completely on anecdote, or it's deferring to something I read somewhere and I want to look smarter than you.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's what I've read somewhere. It's what I've been told. It's what people told me.
Yeah.
Another thing I'll say too is I think you can find evidence or support for your belief if you try hard enough.
It's called confirmation bias. It's absolutely possible to do that. Yes.
Yeah. And I want to be clear. I don't want to crap on anybody that's actually, got feedback or comments about hey, Miller Coors or Budweiser did this study on this and they've shown that over producing their beers that this actually, that you have to do this for lagers to get the character that they want in their beer. There exist things that support these styles, and there's a reason why they're called traditional lager methods, right? Traditionally, they made good beers. Yeah. So I don't want to shit on anybody for saying, that this is how you should make a traditional beer. But you're right. You put a fine point on that. It grinds my gears when you tell me that that's how I have to do it.
Right.
And it's, no, I don't. It's an option. And this is another thing too. There's so much that goes on in beer, right? Like we're doing at Brewlosophy, we're trying to isolate a single variable, right? In all of our experiments, we spend a lot of time designing them to make sure that we're isolating one specific thing. There are hundreds, if not millions, thousands of millions of different things that may or may not affect a way that the beer actually turns out.
Sure.
Isolating it to one variable at least gives us some non-anecdotal, right? It's sensory analysis. It's something a little bit more than just, hey, this is how I feel about this.
Exactly.
This is exactly. We served this to 30 tasters and 30 blind tasters. They did sensory analysis on that, and this was the results. And I think if you look at research like that, if you look at things that are done that way and you decide to change your brewing practices because of those things, that's great. I don't know. And I don't want, certainly for me, is for people to go and take my experiments and say, well, Cade said you have to do this.
Oh my God. I know. And there will be those people who do that, right?
Yeah. Like, no. We're just trying to add to the knowledge base.
Yeah.
And that's all I want.
Exactly. And on the point of evidence, I will absolutely make this claim. A lot of people ask me about it. I get emails often, people asking about, how did you get to the point of making lagers the way that you do? Because I do mostly warm fermentations nowadays, and I have no shame about doing that. It makes beers that I absolutely love. So why would I stop? There's no denying that I would not be brewing the way lagers, at least I would not be brewing them the way that I do if it weren't for the experiments that we have performed on many of the variables that kind of called into question some of these traditional approaches. I don't do decoctions. We have an experiment showing that I talked about it earlier. Decoction mash didn't have much of a difference from single infusion. I do boil for 30 to 60 minutes usually, regardless of my grist, because we've got experiments showing it doesn't seem to have much of an impact. I do ferment warm, same reasons. We've got these experiments. And so all of that together informed these, to be honest with you, it kind of eased my anxiety when it came to trying out non-traditional lager brewing methods. And for me, the results have been very positive. And that's what matters to me. If you want to go and do a decoction mash and boil for 2 hours and age your dunkel for 4 years or whatever, go for it. That's totally fine. And when you do it, my guess is that nobody's going to question your decision to do that, or at least vocally. But when I go and make my dunkel and turn it around in 2 weeks, yeah, boy, a barrage of emails. Be prepared, you know?
Yeah, totally. You know, it's funny that you mentioned that about the experiments influencing our perspective, because the stuff that we're doing, if you go and you look at my bio on the Brewlosophy site, I love this question that you ask on there on the contributors' bios. It's, have the experiments influenced your current brewing practices? You should just go and look at that on my bio. Yes, absolutely. They've influenced my brewing practices, but there's a line here at the end that says, still, I fly sparge, mash, and boil for 60 minutes, sometimes 90, control my fermentation temperatures, manage mash pH, and let my lager sit for at least 30 to 45 days before drinking. All right. So yeah, I mean, and I was reading that and sort of chuckling to myself as you were talking about that, and going like, yeah, this is exactly what I've been saying this whole episode. Evidence is good, and I would like people to show evidence, but it doesn't have to change what you're doing, and you don't have to try to change me or what I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the funny thing, is you still abide by a lot of those more conventional methods. You're still a part of Brewlosophy. It's not like you can't be, hang or whatever. You're here with us. What's interesting to me, and this is something, this gets a little bit more, I think, again, back to the philosophical side of things. But so you make a lager. Let's say I brew a Pilsner using short and shoddy methods. So this, my 2-hour brew day, I'm not decocting anything. I'm fermenting it warm. I'm doing all this crazy crap. Maybe it does produce a beer that tastes a little bit different, right? That doesn't mean that it's worse. That difference could be also a function. Somebody could brew a beer using all of these traditional methods that still tastes different than their favorite commercial lager that's made using traditional methods. That doesn't make it worse. And that's the part that I also kind of get hung up on a little bit, is this idea that if it's at all different in any way whatsoever, minor as that may be, that it's worse in some way. It's bad. And to me, if you want to believe that, again, we've said this a lot, go ahead. I don't mind. But to me, that difference doesn't speak to whether, one of the beers is better or worse. It may very well be that my crazy made lager beer is just as good or even better than one that took longer to brew and lager. In fact, I've talked about this so many times because I think it's kind of funny, but I've entered Vienna lagers that were brewed using short and shoddy methods. Multiple times. In fact, I think I went 4 years in NHC, and every time they at least advanced to the second round, and with scores in the high 30s, low 40s. So they didn't know, those people, those judges didn't know that they were brewed that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you said a comment there too, your short and shoddy ways don't necessarily mean that your beer is better, right? So different doesn't mean worse, but different also doesn't mean better.
That's right.
It's just different, and it just is. I would say you find what you think is or makes your beer good or better, right? And if you like doing it that way, then do it. I would say anecdotally, one of the reasons why I continue to fly sparge is because I like my efficiency numbers to be higher. I get it. It's totally stupid. I could throw an extra handful of grain in the mash and not have to worry about it and save myself a bunch of time. The other thing is, I just like watching the fly sparge. I like setting it up. I like watching it rinse the grains. I like the safety of doing something from a traditional perspective. But that doesn't mean my beer is better because I fly sparge, right? And it doesn't mean that your beer is better because you do brew in a bag, right? It just means even if there's a significant difference, it just means that there's a difference, right? Nothing is necessarily better or worse. Better or worse is totally subjective and is totally dependent on each individual person.
Yeah, it's up to your palate to decide what's better or worse. Now, there's an argument to be made. We did. I think our last Brews Use, in fact, was on evaluation and judging. That presuming that judges do have this better ability to, I guess, compare a beer to the style description from which the beer was brewed to be. I don't know if they do, but that's neither here nor there at this point. If that's the case, then there's a point to be made that, okay, yes, when you brew this certain lager style using these blasphemous methods, then they don't taste the same as one. You know, that difference may put it right outside the lines of being stylistically accurate, if you will. It's again, valid argument. The only issue is I've not experienced that. I've not witnessed that. I believe it was Jake who did the experiment comparing the Mexican lager yeast, that Grupo Modelo one we talked about earlier, fermented at like 10 degrees C or 50 degrees Fahrenheit to like 20 degrees C, which is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I think it was him who did that. And if you go back and you look at that experiment, the warm fermented beer wasn't outside of what you would call a lager beer. You know, even the explanation that Jake gave, even though he preferred the cool fermented one, if I remember correctly, he didn't hate the beer. You know, it wasn't like not a lager. It didn't turn it into an ale, you know, because it was fermented warm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess that raises the whole question of like, how do you define it, or how do you define what is a lager or what is an ale? You know, is it just the different strain of yeast? Is it just, oh yeah, I used Sac Pastorianus, or I used Sac Cerevisiae, and so I've made a lager, or I've made an ale, and is that it, or does it also influence, by the ingredients that you used? Can I only use Pils malts whenever I make a lager? I mean, these are all questions. I would say, there's one thing, and we should probably at some point do a brews. Maybe you and Marshall do like a brews views on this, about like the styles and brewing to style, right? So there's one thing about like, I'm going to try to brew a beer and I'm going to make the best example of German Pilsner that I can. Okay. If I use, let's say I use Imperial's Flagship, and then I use pale malt, and then I use Cascade hops, instead of, Hallertau. And then I ferment it at ale temperatures, not at lager temperatures. And I don't use any finings or something like that. Yeah, I mean, okay, at some point you're going to get to something that doesn't really taste like a German Pils anymore. Right. I would say. And
that you're making a blonde ale then, right? I mean, that's basically, and I get that argument. This is one of my favorite things to discuss with people when it comes to, you start talking about styles, is this concept that is a style determined, is a beer that you make, the style of that beer, is it determined by the process and the ingredients that you use, or is it determined by how you perceive it? I tend to fall fairly heavily on the latter. If I brew a beer that tastes like a German lager, I have absolutely zero qualms calling it a German lager, even if it was fermented with a Kolsch yeast, or it was made using pale malt, or it didn't use noble hops. That doesn't bother me. I don't care. It just, if it tastes like a lager, if it tastes like a Pilsner, it's a Pilsner. If it tastes like an IPA and it wasn't intended to be, I'm fine calling it an IPA. I don't care about that. But there are those out there who absolutely view, and have I heard from these people who absolutely view style as being completely dependent on the way in which it was brewed, the beer was brewed, and the ingredients that were used. Well,
I mean, I would say I don't want to go too far down like a style rabbit hole here, because I could talk about this a long time. I have really strong opinions on styles, and the style guidelines and all that stuff. But I would say if you look at the style guidelines, there's a bunch of things and a bunch of information that's listed on there, right? It has gravity ranges. It has it has objective data like gravity, IBUs, color, all that stuff, and there's ranges in those. Then it has flavor and aroma, sensory descriptions. Then it has history, brewing methods, and ingredients, right? All of those things are in the style, and I would say that all of those things is what makes a beer taste, or that's what makes what we've determined as that style. And I think those things can change, but I think it's all of those things together. It's not just like, okay, that tastes like a German Pilsner, so it must be a German Pilsner. I think you kind of have to look at all of it. You have to look at the whole thing, ingredients and everything.
I understand that perspective. I really do. I guess though, in my mind though, when I look at process variables in particular, so the way in which a beer is brewed and made, that's where and again, this is seen very plainly on what we do at Brewlosophy. You know, most of the stuff that we're testing is process variables. That's where history, I feel, and a lack or presence of certain resources influenced the way in which we approached making beer. I mean, if we were really traditional, we would still be brewing our, you know, or boiling over fire. Why aren't we doing that if that's the traditional way? I mean, so we obviously, you got to move away, and you don't grow without questioning what is, you know, and what has been. You don't learn new things without doing that. So I feel like, again, if you serve me, if we're hanging out and you're, hey, here's a beer I made. It is a Czech Pilsner, and I drink it and it tastes like a Czech Pilsner. That's awesome. And then I say, hey, what'd you do? And you know, you tell me that you boiled it for 30 minutes. It was made with pale malt, and you fermented it warm with a Kolsch yeast. Cool. I'm not gonna be the. To me, it comes across as a little bit arrogant, to be honest. But the guy who's like, well, no, this obviously isn't a Czech Pilsner. You're a dumbass, you know?
Well, yeah, of course. You know, I mean, I think that there's such thing as like brewing to style, and then, you know, making something that is styled like, you know, that tastes like a German Pilsner, right? And I think we can sort of be nuanced about the way we talk about it, right? You know, like if I were introducing this in a competition or something, or if I'm saying I'm going to go and set out to brew the best German Pils I can, like I said, I'm probably not going to use Cascade hops to brew the best, you know, German Pils that I can brew. You know, but if I brew a beer, if I'm going for a blonde ale and I use Cascade hops in it, and those Cascade hops are just not coming through, and it tastes kind of like a German Pils, I don't have any problem calling it a German Pils just for me out there saying, yeah, this is my German Pils. It tastes more like a German Pils than it does my, you know, my blonde ale that I was trying to make. So sure, it's a German Pils, and call it that and go for it. I think there's a difference in the way that you approach how you're brewing it and what you're doing and what methods you're trying to emulate and do. And then, you know, what you call it, what you say, and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. And to be honest, when in talking about, you know, styles and such, I feel like it's easy to get kind of pedantic, because it is kind of this amoebic concept, I think. But to me, again, you know, if I brew a beer, somebody once told me that a beer style is what you intended it to be. It's not what it came out to be. And I just thought that was such a silly concept, right? So if I intended to brew a Vienna lager and it came out tasting like an American amber, I should tell people that it was, you know, it's mostly Vienna malt with a little pale chocolate and yada, yada, but it came out tasting more like an American amber. So I'm still going to call it a Vienna lager, but just one that tastes like an American amber. I think that's silly. I'd be happy calling it an American amber. The point I'm trying to make is this. If somebody brews a German Pilsner and they're so proud of the approach that they took in making it that they want you to know that, then it makes more sense to me to say, this is a German Pilsner that I brewed using very traditional methods. Because that you're clarifying things, and that's cool. And I appreciate the fact that you did that. In the same way that I might say, hey, this is a German Pilsner that I brewed using some pretty wonky methods, you know?
Yeah.
They're still both German Pilsners in my book. I just don't care what you call it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true, right? And I've done enough German Pils brewing, you know, brewed them, or like Helles more often than a Pils. But let's say I brew a Helles and I fermented at warm temperatures. Does that make it not a Helles? And I would say no. Okay, like obviously fermenting it at warm temperatures, I would say yes. Okay, you can still call it a Helles and you can enter it as a Helles, and it is. You know, so yes, while I would agree with you that some things, like if you were isolating them, yeah, then you know, you can still sort of fit within a style. But if you started saying like, I mean, I don't know, I you know, contradict myself in the same sentence. I have no problems with you calling your short and shoddy Helles a Helles, you know, but at the same time, like to me, there is something that is important about saying, yeah, this is a traditional Helles, and you know, that it is brewed in a traditional way like a Helles would be brewed, and so this is a traditional Helles.
I absolutely appreciate that, and in fact, there's a point at which the argument, you know, the question at least of then why even have styles anyways, right? If we're just going to call anything that tastes like anything, a style that's, whatever style, then why even have styles? Because who cares? And there is a point where you've got certain styles that are, and a lot of these are more traditional, old school styles. Like let's take Kolsch and Helles, for example. They are very similar. And what makes them different is the ingredients and process, not necessarily. Now, people would contend that the flavor is very different as well, though. I would bet that you could enter what you call a Kolsch as a Helles in competition, and it'd probably fare decently well. But most of the time,
yeah.
But,
yeah, I mean, yeah.
So I get the argument though that if you're going to ferment something with a Kolsch, with the exception of maybe a small charge of wheat, that Kolsch is basically the same thing as a Helles. Why not just call it a Kolsch then? I get that argument because it is closer to that. You're fermenting it with a Kolsch yeast. So that's kind of a fuzzy line for me a little bit.
Well, sure. I would say there's a lot of fuzziness and a lot of overlap in the styles, right? Like a German Pils and a Helles are very similar beers, right? They're not all that different. They are different, but they're not all that. They're very similar. And so I would say, people always say like, okay, well, if I can call this a Helles, even if it wasn't brewed with the ingredients that are made with the Helles or was a higher gravity than is allowed in the Helles, guidelines or whatever, why do we even have the style of Helles? And my comeback to that, my response to that is always because I want to know what the beer is going to taste like.
Sure.
Right. And so that's why that's why we've defined styles, is because I want to know if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, here's my Helles. I want to know what that tastes. I know, okay, a Helles. Awesome. Let's try it. Or if somebody comes up to me and says, here's my double IPA, I want to know and say, like, okay, cool. Here's my my black IPA. Here's my black IPA. Okay,
sure.
Cool. I want to know what that tastes like.
Yeah.
And that's why I like styles. I think where you have a lot of overlap is, if I added a little bit more hops than I should have to my Helles, it ends up being a Pils or pretty similar to a Pils. And so maybe I'll still call it a Helles because that's what I was trying to brew, even though I really didn't brew that. Or maybe I'll just call it a Pils and be done with it.
See, I'd be more likely to call it a Pilsner because that's what it tasted like. And but again, this isn't me trying to convince people to adopt my perspective. What I'm trying to point out here is, who cares? I mean, it is, we say this all the time, but it's just beer. And if you're so caught up in the way other people do beer, maybe there's a better hobby out there for you, like a used car salesman or something, because you're trying to convince people stuff. Let's have fun with this. And I guess that's my take is I'm going to continue being the guy who questions things, not for the sake of questioning things, but because I feel like in doing that, it motivates action, me testing stuff out. And then in that, I learn new things. And I think that's fun. I think it is exciting to send beers off to a lab and, one boiled for 30 minutes doesn't have DMS. That's fun stuff to me. For some people, maybe it looks disrespectful. I certainly don't intend that. And for whatever reason, when it comes to lager brewing, people have developed some sensitivities to the way, maybe not everybody, but to the way that lager beers need to be brewed. So I do think I speak for both of us when I say that we absolutely do appreciate that others have different opinions than we do. But that does bring us to the end of this episode. Cade, do you have any final words on cutting corners when it comes to brewing lagers?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see from this episode that I don't know that I really have a lager brewing method, So I cut corners where I want to, and I brew things traditionally where I want to. It's just kind of how I feel at the time. And it's been a long time since I've had to dump a batch of beer, so I'm okay with what I'm doing. And if you're okay with what you're doing, keep doing it.
Amen. We say it all the time. And as an aside, if you're out there and you brew a beer using, or lager beers particularly, using specific methods that you are convinced are required, send it to me. I would absolutely love to try it. And I'm open to changing my perspectives. That doesn't necessarily mean I'll change my approach to brewing lagers though. So, all right, don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read about all of the experimental stuff we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.